Loneliness. Nobody warned us about this part of aging. They told us about wrinkles and stiff knees, but nobody said, one day the phone will stop ringing and the grocery flyer will become your best friend. So if you've ever felt lonely and wondered what's wrong with you, stick with me, because the answer, it just might surprise you. Let me ask you something right out of the gate. And don't answer out loud unless you want the cat to think you finally lost it. Have you ever felt lonely, even when you're not technically alone? Because I have. And no one warned us about this part of aging. They did tell us about our wrinkles, and we knew that. They told us about stiff knees and joints, yes. They told us we'd forget why we walked into the room, which, by the way, I have experienced a few times. But nobody sat us down and said, by the way, there may come a time when the house gets quieter, the phone rings less, and you start having full conversations with the grocery flyer. That part, well, that came as a surprise. And before we go any further, let me say this very clearly. If you feel lonely, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not failing at life. You're not doing retirement wrong. And you certainly haven't been put out to pasture, even if sometimes it feels like you've wandered there, accidentally, of course. Now, here's the funny thing about loneliness. It doesn't always look like sitting alone in the dark eating beans out of a can. Although, let's be honest, some nights it's toast and peanut butter, and we call it dinner. Well, loneliness can show up when you're surrounded by people, when you've got family, when you're supposed to feel grateful, and that can even make it more confusing. You think, why do I feel like this? I have people, and then comes the guilt. So let me lift that right off your shoulders. Loneliness isn't about how many people you know. It's about connection. And connection changes as life changes. Think about it. There was a time when your days were full, your role was clear. People needed you constantly. Then one day, they didn't. Not because you stopped mattering, but because the season changed. And nobody hands you a map for that. They just say things like, enjoy your freedom, which sounds lovely, until you're free on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:17, staring at the clock thinking, well, this is awkward. I remember one day realizing I hadn't spoken to another human being all day. I mean, really spoken, not counting the cashier or the automated voice that tells you your call is very important and will be answered in approximately the year 2037. So I did what any sensible person would do. I talked to my puppets, then my guitar, then the kettle. Oh, the kettle was very supportive. It was letting off steam too. Here's another thing no one tells us. Loneliness can creep in quietly. It doesn't knock on the door and announce itself, I'm here. It just it moves in. One day you're fine, and the next day, well, you feel a little untethered, like you're floating, just slightly off course. And because we're a generation that prides itself on being strong, we don't always talk about it. We think, I should be able to handle this. Other people have it worse. I don't want to be a burden. So we smile, we manage, we cope. But inside, something feels thin. Now here's where I want to gently bring in the humor again, because laughter is a lifeline. I've learned that if I can laugh with my loneliness instead of fighting it, it loosens its grip. For example, When I realize I've planned my entire day around one appointment, when I get excited because, well, someone actually called instead of texting. When I put something in the oven and forget it exists until a smoke alarm reminds me. These aren't failures. They're signs that we're still human, still here, still participating, even if the crowd is smaller. And smaller doesn't mean less. It doesn't mean less meaningful. In fact, sometimes it means the opposite. Here's a quiet truth I've come to believe. Loneliness isn't telling you something is wrong. It's telling you something matters. It means you still care. You still want connection. You still feel. And that, my friend, is not a flaw. Now, I'm not here to give you a list of 10 ways to fix loneliness, because honestly, you're not broken. You don't need fixing. But I am here to remind you of a few gentle things. First, you're not the only one feeling this, not even close. Second, this chapter, like all the others, is still being written. It's not the epilogue. And third, connection doesn't always arrive the way it used to. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a routine, through learning something new, through a familiar voice on YouTube, like mine, even if it is croaky, through leaving a comment and realizing someone answered back. And sometimes it arrives right here in moments like this, when you realize someone understands exactly what you couldn't quite put into words. If you're watching this and thinking, well, she's talking about me, then I want you to know this. You're welcome here. You belong here. And you don't have to pretend at all. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and there's no pressure to answer, like if you don't want to. But if you do feel like it, I'd love to know, what's one small thing that brings you comfort lately? It could be silly. It could be simple. It could be as basic as a warm cup of tea in a quiet morning. Sometimes sharing the small things makes us feel a little less alone. And if today is one of those days where your loneliness feels heavier than usual, please remember this. You're not invisible. You're not done. And you're not walking this road by yourself, even when it feels that way. I'm glad you're here. At first we might be strangers, but after a bit, I sure hope we become friends. With that, I'll leave you to ponder on those thoughts I've shared. Meanwhile, take care. Keep smiling. Love ya. Until the next time, bye for now.